so happy to be here, to be interviewing Cheryl. It feels really synchronistic that I'm here today. I came across Cheryl's work about a year and a bit ago, where I was doing the school run for my 10-year-old son. And one of my friends, I live in a tiny little village in Sussex, and my friend was all blotchy. She came down and said, "Oh, are you all right?" And she said, "I've just been reading this book." And my friend, she happens to be Radio 4's book editor, which is very nice. And she's like, "You can't read it." So I said, "Oh yeah, whatever." So I took the book, and then the next time I went to the school run, that was me, all blotchy. So the first time I came across you, you made me cry. But I just wanted to say a big thank you. I think the book, Wild, touched a nerve in me about grief and healing that perhaps other books have never reached. For me, I lost my parents also when I was a teenager. So for me to be able to read about raw grief in such a strong and beautiful way, and also showing a way out, showing somebody who's actually understood how I was feeling, it was just absolutely incredible. So I'm really, really delighted to be talking to Cheryl today.
Thank you so much. Thank
you.
So
I just wanted to start us off on the journey. I just want you to describe the scene when you decided, I am going to go off on a journey of 1,100 miles on the Pacific Crest Trail. Describe to me the decision that you made and why you made it.
Well, I was at this time in my life that I really, the only way to accurately describe it is to say I was at this place that I think was the bottom point. I had been in deep grief over the death of my mother. She'd been dead at this point about 3.5 years. And by this point, my marriage had unraveled. I was only 26, but I'd gotten married really young to somebody who I loved, who was a good person. But I knew that I couldn't stay with him. I didn't want to stay with him. I didn't want to be married to anyone. But that was incredibly heartbreaking for me, nonetheless, because he was I loved him and he loved me. And in my sorrow, I did what a lot of people do. I grieved in ways that I think were noble and the ways that we all hope that we'll grieve. And then I grieved in ways that were self-destructive and in ways that actually brought more grief. And in my case, it was really promiscuous sex, and then eventually drug use. One of the guys that I became involved with, those of you who've read Wild know, he introduced me to heroin, and I began using heroin. And when I used, it's really interesting now, the 45-year-old me can look back on the 20-something me and see very clearly that actually my impulse to use heroin was the same impulse that brought me to hike that trail, and that I was really seeking a cure for pain. I was trying to heal. And when I used heroin, it actually, the first feeling I had was that I was safe now, that I had escaped my sorrow. Finally, there was something that could actually lift this weight that I was carrying, and it was planet heroin.
But was it that, or was it numbing? For me, it was. I spent a lot of time just numbing,
right,
whatever I could in unhealthy and healthy ways.
Right.
Was it about
it wasn't
curing?
that. Of course, it wasn't that. But what I'm saying is, it felt like that for a moment. And of course, what happened in that next moment is that my life then really did start falling apart in a pretty serious way because of drug use. And so I was at this place. I was at the bottom. Full of regret, full of remorse, full of, why am I even here? And I found out I was pregnant by the man, the heroin addict boyfriend. And that was where I just thought, okay, I cannot do this. I cannot live this life. This is not me. And it wasn't so much that I felt the need to save myself, because I really felt at that time that I was really a worthless person. But I knew that I could not. My mother had loved me too well for me to destroy myself. I couldn't disrespect my mother that much. I had to honor her. And I think in some ways, I thought that self-destruction and deep grief, I was honoring my mother because I couldn't go on without her. I couldn't thrive. And suddenly I had this revelation, I guess. It's like that Rilke poem where, that culminates in the, you must change your life. And it was that I must change my life. And I had to find a way. I had scattered. I had to find a way to gather. And so I decided to hike the Pacific Crest Trail.
Okay, so there's a bit of a gap there. So you were in this dark place, and many of us would have chosen a bit of counselling, maybe.
I know.
How were you inspired to do that? Why did you think that was the solution?
Well, those of you who are familiar with my Dear Sugar column, I always tell people to trust the gut, to trust the body. The body knows. And I was living at the time in Minnesota, which is a very cold place, lots of snow, and there had been a blizzard, and my truck was buried in snow, and I needed to dig it out. And I went to this outdoor store called REI to buy a shovel, and when I was waiting in line to pay for the shovel, I saw a guidebook the book just said Pacific Crest Trail, Volume 1, California. And I picked it up. I'd never heard of the Pacific Crest Trail. Had any of you heard of the Pacific Crest Trail before? Even many Americans still haven't heard of it. I mean, they heard of it through Wild. And I just turned the back over and read this paragraph about this trail. And what happened inside of me was I felt this blossoming. And I just thought, this is a magnificent, beautiful thing. And what if, maybe I just need to go to that thing, attach myself to that thing. And I just trusted that feeling, even though there were, problems with that. Namely that, I'd never gone backpacking before and stuff like that. But I mean, I've always been a little fuzzy on, the details of things. But the idea, I'm an idea woman, so.
But that's what's so amazing. I mean, many of us, I'm sure, had that. Oh, I'm going to do that. Brilliant, hurrah! And off we go. And then think, oh, you know what? I can't be bothered. It's the kind of Joseph Campbell thing, you know, where there's the invitation and you're like, yeah, and then there's a refusal of like, nah, not really. So, what were you? Why did you continue? So you had that moment of, right, this is it, the blossoming. Right. And then, did you have any doubt, or were you very determined that you were going to do it?
No, I had a lot of doubts, and all along the way, preparing for the trip, and
switch off your mobiles, I think, everybody.
Preparing. I've always wanted to just answer the phone on stage from somebody and just see what happened. But preparing for the trip. Many people, I would tell them what I was doing. And especially, my friends, my friends who had witnessed all this, like sleeping with, all these people and doing heroin. And, they're all freaked out by what I've been up to. And then I'm like, okay, now I'm going to go hike this trail. And they were all saying.
Did they roll their eyes? It's like, oh,
well, they said, what do you, maybe, are you sure you need to do this? And isn't this dangerous? And, my joke was always like, not as dangerous as shooting heroin. But, and it isn't actually, statistically, it's safer to wilderness. So I highly recommend that over heroin, if any of you are. But, and then the time, the biggest doubt, I think, was the night before my hike when I checked into this motel and looked at all the shit I had to carry. And I thought, maybe I didn't think this all the way through.
Really?
And so that was
Tell me about Monster. Introduce us to Monster, because for me that made me laugh so much, is that you were there. And it's was it the first time you'd actually packed your bag at that point?
Yes, I had never packed my backpack until the day I began backpacking. And, you're really, when you're going on a, 100-day or so journey, it is a good idea to take the pack out on a trial run and things like that. And so I didn't do that, and I for the first time packed my pack, and not everything would fit. It was an awful lot of stuff, and the pack was really heavy. I mean, sort of unbelievably so, like just really heavy.
Wasn't it the half of your body weight?
At least that. I mean, what's interesting right now, the film of Wild is being made, and so we'll get back to Monster in a minute, but just let me tell you this bit. Because people always say, well, how much did your pack weigh? And the only thing that I did not bring on the trail was a scale. So I don't know. how much it weighed, but it weighed a whole lot. And so right now the film of Wild is being made, and Reese Witherspoon is playing me, and she's dressed exactly like me in 1995 on the trail. They have I still have my backpack, and so they borrowed it, and then they recreated the pack exactly the way I packed it, everything. And so they have on the set, a few different packs for different scenes. And one weighs like 25 pounds, and one weighs like 45 pounds, and one weighs like 65 pounds. And she wears it depending on what she's doing. And so at one point, I was like, well, I think she should wear the heaviest pack in this scene. And so they had me go, like, show her how I put it on. And I lifted it, and it was like, no problem. 65 pounds. And my pack was definitely heavier. It was like 80, 85, maybe 90. Just the water alone on the first day was 24 pounds, just the water. Everything else was, so it was a lot. And I had been out on the trail a few days when I gave the pack a nickname, Monster, and I referred to it as Monster. And I didn't know later that I would write a book about it, and it would be actually have sort of metaphorical resonance too, that I'm walking along with the monster, on my back, like we all do in life.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the irony is your book inspired me so much that last summer I decided I was going to take my own trek down the Cornwall coast. And like you, I packed my bag with my tent. I lasted half a day before I put my tent up at the one. And I used to walk and then get the bus back. Just so
I know, I love this. I didn't take the bus. There were no buses on the PCT, sadly. But it was hard, wasn't it?
It was really, really hard.
Yeah.
And but one of the things I really resonated with, you made the decision to go, and there was a quote in the book. It would say, I could go back in the direction I'd come from, or I could go forward in the direction I intended to go. And it was a decision you made. And I think when it's that decision that you've made, you've lost your mum. There's two ways you can go. You can go down self-destruction, heroin, spiral down, or you can go on the PCT, and you can go and walk along those things. Tell me about that decision that you made. Where did you find, you talked about that blossoming, but where did you find that kind of the wisdom or the knowledge that's to keep on walking, to take those steps and not get the bus?
I don't really know, but I know a few things. One is that, that scene, that line you quote, what's just happened right before I wrote that line is I've just been basically almost mauled by a Texas Longhorn bull. And in the final moment as this bull is, approaching me, I'm so afraid that I close my eyes because I can't bear to look at this bull in the face. I mean, it's like this. I don't know if any of you have ever seen a Texas Longhorn bull. It's a very, very gigantic thing with horns, okay? And it's scary. And so I closed my eyes and I blew the whistle, the world's loudest whistle, really loud. And when I opened my eyes, the bull is not there. And so then the question is, well, which way is the bull? And okay, because whatever way the bull is, I don't want to walk in that direction, okay? So, and in the book, now after years of thinking about this moment, I understood its metaphorical resonance with essentially all of us, everyone in this room, like what we always have to do. And the deal is that there's no escaping the bull. The bull is in every direction. And I think that when we try to escape suffering or try to escape fear or discomfort or truth, or any of those things that can be difficult, we think, okay, that's over there, so I'm going to go this way. But guess what? It's that way. And until you kind of just decide that you can give yourself over to walking in the direction of the bull, you're never going to do what you need to do, I think, as a human to evolve. And so I think that, I don't know if that answers your question really exactly, but I guess I started to learn that at some point.
But what I'm hearing you say is that piece around, it's not overcoming fear. We never overcome fear or grief. We don't overcome it. We just learn to be with it. Mm-hmm. And I think my mistake has been trying to escape grief or trying to escape
Yes.
fear, anything rather than be in the room, run away
Right.
from the bull as fast as I can.
But then there's the bull.
And there he is.
I know, and that's it. Before we came out here, we talked about, losing our parents and how, so much of understanding grief had to do with understanding that we would always have it.
Yeah.
That we were back there getting tears in our eyes talking about our mothers. And there it was. Our moms have been dead more than 20 years. And there it still is. And I think that accepting, giving yourself into that and saying, this isn't something that's going to go away. It's something that will always be with me. And learning how to live with it is a more healing and powerful experience than escaping it.
Yeah. I mean, you talk, I think, in the Dear Sugars, this idea of reaching. You were a mentor for some young teenage girls. Mm-hmm. It's such a brilliant piece in The Tiny Beautiful Things. And you say to them, reach. You have to do more than hold on. You have to find a way within yourself to not only escape the shit, but transcend it. And for me, again, I was like welling up, crying once again, Cheryl. But it's that piece around, we can't escape it. No. We can't wriggle out of it. We can't get out the way of grief or the darkness, but we have to find a way to transcend it somehow. Right. And I suppose my question is how do we do that? What would your advice to us be? How do we reach? How do we transcend that? Yes, acceptance that it's always there, but then where do we go? Yes, acceptance that it's there beside us, but then where? I think,
so I was going to say acceptance, surrender, but I think the other thing is, and here again, so much of the advice I give as Sugar, is advice of the spirit, rather than do this, and then this, and then this. It's rather a sort of bigger, more universal advice, which has to do with taking responsibility for your life. And so on the trail, the thing I had to do was just keep moving forward, even when it was painful. And I think that was physically enacting what we all need to do over and over again when we have something that's difficult. And so I think transcending and reaching, and in that column you referred to, which is called How You Get Unstuck, what I'm saying to these teenage girls have every reason to fail. They have every reason to become pregnant at 15 or go to prison or whatever it is that their parents, most of them, had done. They could blame their abusive parents, they could blame poverty, they could blame any number of social factors. But ultimately, in that column, what I said to the girls I worked with is, you have to be the person who changes your life. Nobody will ever change your life for you. You have to be that person. And so transcending has to do, I think, with taking responsibility. That word means moving from one realm to another, and so your life is here, and if you want it to be there, you're the one who has to get it there. And there are a whole bunch of things you need to do to make that happen. It doesn't have to do with, sitting around saying over and over again that you want to go there. It has to do with walking yourself there, one step at a time, I think. Working with those girls was so fascinating to me, because we would do this career day, and they would get to write down on a piece of paper what they wanted to be when they grew up, and then tape it to their shirts. And then we would, talk to them about that career. And it was always, they all wanted to be pediatricians or marine biologists, pretty much all of them. But then they hated school, and they would never do their homework, and they would never do any of those things. And so I would say, well, how are you going to, you don't just grab a bunny out of a hat and then you're a pediatrician. How are you going to do that? And I think that has to do with that taking responsibility piece, that one step at a time piece.
I think it's the taking responsibility, but then I think it's what's so, I think, inspiring about the journey and wild. It was literally one physical step at a time. Right. It's a very simple message in a way.
It's so simple.
Okay, I can't do this. Well, you can take a step though.
You can.
And then you can take another one, even if you have got a monster on your back.
And on the trail, one of the most, I think, useful things and powerful things for me was that I was I was the person who every consequence, I was the one who paid the full price. I paid the consequences. For every action, I had the consequence. And sometimes it was a positive one, and sometimes a negative one. But it was just me and myself, and I wasn't depending on anyone else. That was really important for me to go alone.
But I think, again, your story, again, why it's so inspiring is it's the story of the orphan who learns to stand on her own 2 feet and to be strong again. And I think, there's maybe the proverbial orphan in all of us who we're learning how to grow up and how to take the step and how to learn that we are strong, despite facing all the difficulties that you may face in life.
Right.
It's wonderful. In terms of, you did rattlesnakes, you did bears, you did the scary campers, did you ever feel, I don't know what I'm going to do now? Did you know? I know from reading the book the answer to that, but tell me a little bit about those moments of intense fear.
Yeah, right. There were a few, and I always felt like I wanted to run away shrieking, And I instead had to sit quietly and figure out my way through it. And I think that doubt. I think sometimes when we think about, whether it be like people will say, "Oh, you're so brave on the page," and I'm always like, "I'm terrified. I'm actually terrified writing that stuff." And I think that we have, all of us in some ways misinterpreted how we're supposed to feel when it comes to things like fear. I wasn't courageous on the PCT. I was often afraid. But I think getting used to fear or saying, okay, I'm afraid of this and I can still keep going was a big, I was facing that almost every day. And fear of things like, I think we think of rattlesnakes as scary, right? But really the scariest situation I was probably on my hike was when I ran out of water. That was I was terrified. I knew the consequences of that, and they were grave, And so I think that I was in some ways looking for that too. When I said that, deciding to use heroin, it was like hiking the trail in one way, and that is, I was in some ways needing to test myself against something, which is a really ancient human, as you know, story where, the hero's journey has to do with going into the darkness and facing the demons and the dragons. And coming back from that experience changed. And I was aware that that's, I was giving myself my own rite of passage.
Yeah.
Our cultures have kind of missed that, I think.
But do you think it needs to be that scary, or can some of us just get the bus? Do you think?
Yeah, you can just take the bus.
Yeah.
No, well, that's it. That's what's been so cool. It's not. The other thing is too. Many people have taken far, greater adventures than mine. The point of Wild is not like, look at me, I did this incredible thing. I actually did a very, many people have hiked better and further and, braver. But the point is, this is the journey I went on. And I think that everyone's journey can look a different way, And I get so many emails from people saying, well, just like you said, oh, I took this 50-mile hike in this place, or I did this. People make it their own, and it's really about the journey.
Yeah, yeah. You talked about being brave on the page, and so you've written about the trail after you've taken the actual journey and being brave. How have you done that? In terms of literally being brave on the page. The thing that's so attractive about the book that you want to you can't leave it is because it's so raw and it's so devastating almost the way you write. And you've been so vulnerable on the page, so brave on the page. But how could you do that, having so much time pass? Or is it because so much time's passed that you were able to do that? Right.
I think, I didn't think I was going to write about my hike until I did. I began writing the book in 2008. And, I'm just, as a writer, I think really the writer's job is to tell the truth. And not just the truth, but the deepest truth that can be possibly uncovered, the darkest and brightest place that we can go. I think that that's what artists do. That's what they show to us. That's what they reveal to us. And so I really feel that that's my job as a writer, whether I'm writing about a fictional character or myself, to go to all of those places. And if you don't do that, you haven't done your work. And I think that that's connected to the reason that I didn't feel like writing about my hike until I did. That I needed to come to that place as a writer, to learn, just to apprentice myself to the craft for a number of years. And also I had to gain some perspective on that person I was at 26.
Yeah.
I began writing it when I was like 38 or 39, and I could look back. I was in a very different place. I could look back on myself with both a subjective lens, but in some ways an objective one too. And so that's, I waited because I needed to gain that perspective. And also, my first book is a novel called Torch, and that was the book that I had to write. I couldn't think about writing anything till I got that out of my system. And that book's going to be published in the UK here in a few months.
This is the one book I haven't read of yours, so I'm looking forward to reading that. So when you were writing sort of 20 years on now from when you were...
18 years on, yeah.
18 years.
Since the hike, yeah.
So looking back, what did you learn on the hike? And have you put those lessons into action 20 years on? You look about the way you're living your life.
Right.
Are you living and breathing those lessons now?
Yes, that is the thing about any difficult experience or beautiful experience or life-altering experience is that you carry it with you.
Yeah.
You carry it with you into your life, and you're forever changed because of it. And so there's no question in my mind that every day. There are all these places. I think that I would still be where I am had I not hiked the PCT. But I had to have some journey like that. I had to have some big experience to shake myself back into my real life, or the person I needed to be.
And you think the wilderness, what part did the wilderness, and your story, we did a whole dossier at Psychologies magazine around wilderness because inspired by your book. I wrote about you in the Sunday Times, inspired by your book. I went up.
Thank you.
But I do feel like the wilderness is a very, even though I was getting the bus, I was on the coast of Cornwall, going up and down.
And I love the wilderness here. There's a bus.
That's great. It's the kind of wilderness you need, love, can I just say? But tell me a little bit of what role do you think the wilderness plays in your healing, or why do you think it's healing?
I think that it's, how do you all feel when you go into the wilderness? Don't you just feel kind of healed? I think that when we put ourselves in the company of the divine, which I think the wilderness is, the magnificent, the bigger than us, we feel humble, and we feel grace-filled, and we feel restored and serene, and all of those things. Unless you're flipping out because there's a rattlesnake at your feet. But, you feel those things. And so I knew, and I had grown up in northern Minnesota for my teen years. When I was 12, my stepfather, who was a carpenter, fell from a roof and broke his back. And we lived at the time in this little town outside of Minneapolis. And my stepfather had been working under the table, which means, he wasn't he wasn't officially being paid by his boss. And so when he fell from the roof and broke his back, his boss said, "I don't know that man. He didn't work for me." And it was a terrible, difficult year. My stepfather was laid up with a broken back for a year. And my mother at the time was working as a secretary for an attorney, and the attorney said, "I'll bring a suit against your husband's boss, and you guys can get a settlement." And they won the settlement, and my parents got $12,000. And we were poor, and it was really the only money that they knew that was the only time they would have any bit of money to buy some land. And so they did. They went to northern Minnesota. Land was really cheap. It still is really cheap. And for $12,000, they bought 40 acres of land that nobody had ever lived on. Wilderness, woods, cold, really cold. And we moved onto this land, and we lived in a one-room tar paper shack that my stepfather built, my family of 5. And we built our house nearby, and we lived in this house. We didn't have electricity or indoor plumbing or running water or anything all through my teen years.
Wow.
We would, heat up. Our wood stove was a metal barrel, a 55-gallon barrel that my stepfather had used his blowtorch and made into a wood stove.
Yeah.
And we lived this way, in this kind of back to the land way. My mom grew a lot of our food and made our clothes and, did all of that stuff. And I think in so many ways, so the wilderness was home to me.
Yeah.
And when my mom died, things happened with my stepfather that made it so that that place, that home that we built together was not my home anymore. I was exiled from this place. And my stepfather got involved with another woman pretty quickly after my mom died, and she didn't really want us, my siblings and I, around. And so, it was lost to me. And, all these years later, when I was writing Wild, is when I understood that in some ways, when I decided to hike the PCT, I was turning
Going
to
back
home.
Yeah.
Even though it was a foreign home. It was this other place. I knew that it was a place that I could be safe and find myself again.
Yeah, and it was a place that was familiar. It was that comfort.
Yeah, and even though it was a different, so I didn't have that sort of city idea. I was afraid of the city, actually, when I went to college in the Twin Cities. That's Minneapolis and St. Paul in Minnesota. I was, terrified of all the city people because they did city things. Like, they drove fast,
Yeah. I can't remember where I've read it because I did a little bit of research, but this thing around, you knew you wanted to be a writer, even though you were brought up in a kind of, your word, I think, uneducated way.
Yeah.
But in a way, the way your mother brought you up was incredibly creative.
Yes.
It made me laugh. She, you wouldn't perhaps have posh drinks.
That's right.
So she would put something in the water and say,
She would put
and
food coloring in the water.
to be,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Darling, let's have
Yes.
champagne.
She would speak in a British accent because to us Americans, anything British is instantly like more sophisticated. But yeah, there would be times that we didn't have sugar, and my mother would put food coloring in the water, and she would be Miss Bettina von so-and-so, and she would she would say, "Darling, would you like?" I won't do my British accent to you guys, but would you like another? And we would do these pretend drinks. But that was my mom, and she brought magic into our lives, and she would always say, which made me, when I was a teenager, want to like smother her. But she would say, "We aren't poor, we're rich in love." And, she was very looking on the bright side. And which, when you're 17, you do not appreciate, right? And, but, as is the case, maybe some of you have found this to be true in your life too, that, you look back on some of those things that your parents said to you or annoyed you about or whatever, and then you grow older and you look back and you see that they were right, and that they actually handed you the tools for your own survival. And I think that that's really the case with my mother. That her optimism eventually became the worldview that I had to take on, and also she made us feel rich. We were rich in love.
Yeah.
We were. And I have friends who were rich in material and poor in love, and I wouldn't trade places with them for anything.
I think what was really interesting as well for me was this idea of how she created an environment where creativity blossomed.
Yeah.
And so perhaps in your environment, it wasn't the done thing to be a writer. Perhaps you wouldn't normally, but you both went to college together, didn't you, at the same time? Is that right?
We did. So how that happened, so when I went, I always knew I wanted to be a writer. From the very first time I could read, I just was, I distinctly remember the moment, it was an epiphany. And my family didn't go to church, but I spent the night with a friend on a Saturday night, and when I woke up on Sunday morning, her family attended a Lutheran church. And so I had to go with them, and we were put off into the Sunday school. And there was this little pamphlet that they handed out to all the kids, and it was really a chapbook of watercolors, and each watercolor was accompanied by a little poem that was about the sort of God's glory in the natural world, like the little riffs on butterflies and sunsets and flowers. And I remember reading it and thinking, just being pierced by the beauty. Really pierced by the beauty of those words and what words could do, which was make a feeling and a picture. And I wanted to do that. I wanted to be a person in the world who made beauty through language.
How old were you then?
6. 6. Yeah. And I just thought, I have to do this thing. And I'd never thought it ever, like it wasn't I didn't know that someone like me could actually be a writer. I thought I didn't know what the route was, but I knew that college would be part of it. But so when I was in high school, nobody told me, what you need to do to go to college. And so when I was in my senior year in high school, I just started to get brochures from colleges. They start to, send you things. And I didn't know it was a competitive process, really, that you should apply to more than one or anything. And so I just lined up the brochures on my table, and I looked at the pictures, and the one that looked the least weird, was the one I applied to. And it was the College of St. Thomas, which is a private Catholic school. Private and public means different things here, right?
Yeah.
It means it costs a lot of money. Private Catholic University in St. Paul, Minnesota. And when they accepted me, they were trying to woo me to come there because they didn't realize that, they were the only game in town for me. And they said, one of the things, if you go, your parents can go to college for free. And, they were thinking like somebody's mom would take like French, 101 or something. But my mother saw this and she said, I've always wanted to go to college. And I said, no fucking way. No. And because would any of you at the age of 17 have volunteered to bring your mom? Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you wanted to bring your mom. So I was like, no way, you are not going to college with me. Get that idea out of your head. And then, what happened is, of course, there's the true thing, which is no fucking way. And then there's the truer thing, which is my mother has given me so much. And then the truest thing is that, that I couldn't stand in the way of her opportunity. And so I said to her, you can go to college with me with one rule, is that should we ever encounter each other on campus, she cannot show any recognition. Do not address me, do not look twice, just keep on going, Mom. And she was like, okay, that's fine. And she was so respectful that this was this moment in my life where I needed to separate, She really, and she was 40. And I just remember thinking, I can't believe somebody so ancient is going to college. And so we went that first year together. And it wasn't a good fit for me. I was paying my own way through, and it was just too expensive, and it was a conservative school, and I was a writer. And so I went to my mom and said, look, I'm going to transfer. And she said, that's fine, I'll transfer too. And so she did, and we went to the University of Minnesota, but thankfully there's more than one campus. So I went in Minneapolis, and she went up in Duluth, which was near our house, about an hour and a half away from our house.
What occurs to me as you're talking is, you had that lovely time of, usual teenage mother type of relationship, but you had a fantastic relationship with mother, as you've told in Wild. How do you think that has impacted the way you are a mother today? Do you think, for me, I think I parent just like my mother, which is terrible. Uh-huh. For you, how do you parent your children? Because you've got 2 children.
Yes, I have 2 kids. I feel like that I parent them very much the way my mom parented me. My kids have a profoundly different life than I had as a kid. They just, Do
you think that's a good thing?
I do. I sometimes worry, I feel like so much of who I am was kind of learned through my hardscrabble childhood. Yeah. I grew up in poverty. I learned a lot from that. my kids, just have I mean, they have two parents who have master's degrees in the arts. Their father is a filmmaker, I'm a writer. They just get to have a different kind of life. And so I do worry about them just not having to kind of, work as hard, frankly, as I had to work.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I love that they have I mean, the thing that I think made me cry the hardest since all of this stuff has happened with Wild is I bought a piano for my kids, and they started piano lessons. And I just always wanted to have piano lessons my whole life, and I never got to. And now I'm too busy to take piano lessons. But I gave them to my kids, and my kids get to be the kids who get piano lessons, And so that's a big deal. And any of you who grew up, and were able to give your kids what you didn't get, it's just a powerful experience, And so yeah, but the way I parent them, essentially, is the same way my mother did, with love, with a great amount of love and openness about that love. My mother didn't ever withhold. When my mom found out she was dying, and she died 7 weeks later, I distinctly remember us talking about how it was like, okay, this is our last chance with each other, right? She's gonna die. And the coolest thing was that there was nothing we had to say to each other. There was nothing that we had to say to each other because we'd already said it. There were no like secrets or things that had gone unsaid or unresolved. It was all present already. I knew that, and my mother did too. I feel so lucky about that.
As you're talking, I still get that big lump in my throat, and
let's not. We won't cry. Is anyone crying?
But we were talking a little bit about the idea of raw grief and how it changes. And then for me, reading the book, you hit every note of that, and it's not very often you get someone who hits that note. And for me, it was like, she gets it, she understands. And do you think your grief has changed over the years?
Yes, I do.
Way? Yeah.
Now, first, for those of you who haven't read the book, it's also very funny in parts. Right? Have any of you read? Some of you have read Wild, and there were funny parts, right? Funny things. Okay, but the grief thing.
Sorry, upset.
There are also sad parts, but there are funny parts. I always say to people, sometimes I'll get an email and they'll be like, I just finished chapter 1 and I don't know if I can go on. And I'm like, it gets funny. Just keep reading. Hold on, baby.
Just don't let them get to the horse.
Oh, no, the horse.
Let's not talk about the horse.
Oh, God. So, that's a terrible scene. I apologize for the horse. Even writing it, I was like, if I were a reader, I would just skip right past this, But grief, how has my grief changed? It's absolutely, it was so enormous and monumental, in the years right after my mom died. And what's interesting about it is it's still incredibly powerful. I can still, every day I feel the absence of my mother, but it absolutely does become, more manageable, more part of life, and I have a deeper and more complex understanding of how I can carry it with me with some grace and without being ruled by it.
Or destroyed by it.
Or destroyed by it, yeah. And so it gets easier, even though it's still there, And the beauty, the beautiful thing about deep grief, and those of you who've lost somebody essential to you, I know you know what I mean about this, is what it's really about is love. The only reason that you still grieve somebody 23 years after they died is because you actually, truly, really loved them. And isn't that amazing? That just amazes me. I really loved my mom.
Yeah, absolutely don't. To have it both.
I know.
Are you ever worried what your children will say when they read your work? How do you feel about them reading it for the first time, maybe as 17, 18, when they...
I think they're really lucky to have a mom who's a writer. I would love to have access to the interior lives of my parents. Now, I wouldn't have loved it when I was 17. And I don't think that my kids, it's not as if, when they turn 16, I'm gonna be like, happy birthday, kids, with a stack of my books. Time to get to know mommy better. You know, I will warn them about, you know, that maybe there will be some things that they don't want to read. Like right now they know the story. I went to their school. My kids are 7 and 9, and last year I went to their school and gave a talk, and I was more nervous for that talk than any talk. And so what was interesting to me is, you know, obviously there were pieces of the book that I couldn't talk about in specific terms. But, you know, I could talk about more about the book than maybe you would first think. Because one of the things I decided when I went in is I wasn't going to just tell them about the hike. I was going to tell them about grief. And because there's always, you know, we assume that children, I don't know why we assume this, that children don't know about grief. But there's always one person in the room whose dad died or whose mom died or who, you know. And so I did slideshows. It's the only group for whom I've done a slideshow in all of my wild talking. And the first slide was a picture of my mom. And I explained to them that my mom died, and I was so sad that I didn't know what to do, so I went on a long walk. And the kids were just absolutely riveted by that portion of my lecture. And then I went on and gave the hike, you know, the talk about the hike. And afterwards, the kids went back to their classrooms, and they were all asked to draw a picture about my talk. And at least half of them drew portraits of my mom. And it was because that was the part that touched them the most, that meant that connected with them. So, you know, I talked to them about the human element of the book, you know, that this is why I did this thing. And, you know, there are some sex scenes in the book, and there's some drug stuff. And my kids will probably be uncomfortable with it, and they'll wait until they're old enough that they can handle it, and then they'll handle it. Yeah. You know, and that's the thing about your mom is, you know, you have the mom you have. And we all learn to live with that. And the mom they have just happens to be, you know, somebody who writes excruciatingly honest things about herself, you know. And I'm sure, you know, they'll have something to say, should I ever really start writing excruciatingly honest things about them, which I will avoid doing. But, you know, I just think that they'll be okay. And frankly, fortunate someday, you know, like when they're in their 40s, they'll be like, yay, my mom wrote a book. But, you know, before that, I understand it's, like my brother read Wild, of course. And he loved the book, and we had a deep talk about it. But he did say, well, when you remember that scene when you're in Ashland and you're like gonna have sex with that hippie in the tent? He's like, I just sort of had to skim that part. And I was like, thank you. You know? He's like, I don't need to read that stuff about my sister.
Oh. So would you do the trail again?
Of course I would.
Would you?
Yes.
Really?
Oh, yes. Though, you know, I have to say, it's funny, because so the film is being shot, and, you know, we're out there. I don't know how many of you have been on a film set, but it's, you know, it's grueling. It's really hard work. It's long days. And, you know, most of the movie, obviously, is outside, and you're in the elements. And I'm watching Reese, like, hike along under this pack.
Can I just ask you, what is it like seeing Reese Witherspoon playing yourself? Can we just have a moment here? How incredible that is. Reese Witherspoon.
I know. It's so
movie star is playing you in your. I mean, what?
I know. It's
what
it's
does
so
that
bizarre.
feel like?
I don't even have words for it. It's so strange. I mean, there's so many times where I just think, okay, what the fuck is going on? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, this is so weird. You know, I mean, but yeah, it's very strange. And there's Reese. So yeah, it's strange. And
so you're there on the film set. And
they're on the film set, and we're outside, and, you know, we're just pretending, okay? We're just pretending that this woman's out alone in the wilderness, and, you know, and there's, like, she's trying to make the stove work, and what's so funny, I loved this. I was like, okay, so she's trying to cook dinner, and of course all the props guys and stuff are like lighting the stove for her and everything. Unlike, I didn't have any guys out there lighting my stove. And the thing keeps going out, like it keeps over and over and over, like, and it won't work. And I'm like, see, I wasn't such an idiot. Like even professionals can't get it to work. And
that's great.
So, and every once in a while, this is what it's like. So there's this whole thing, and there's this movie star, and she's dressed in clothes exactly like what I was wearing, and, you know, and she's doing this thing, and there will be some times where she's in the middle of the scene, and suddenly I'll remember, like I'll have almost like a body memory of what it was like to be standing there but no film crew around, like just to be alone in the wilderness. And I'll go back to that place in my mind, and it was hard, and it was lonely, and it was really, really profoundly solitary. You know, like in every direction, there was no humans. It was just me, and I mean, sometimes for miles.
Well, you
know?
there was the first 8 days,
yes,
nobody.
8 days, nobody. And I'll go back to that. And so, like, if I did the trail again, if I did it alone again, which I don't know that I would do that. You know, I want to go with my husband and my kids. But if I did it alone again, I know for sure that it would be hard. I've gone on backpacking trips by myself since then. And even just like the first few days, it's like, okay, this is not fun. This is uncomfortable.
You need the bus.
The bus.
Yeah.
The bus is a good thing.
That's the trick.
But just to settle back into that solo-ness is, you know, it's difficult.
And just being with yourself. I mean,
Yeah.
and, you know, I only managed 5 days.
And your own thoughts. See, that's the other thing. 1995, different world
No phones.
than now. No phones, no. I mean, I didn't have any electronics with me. I didn't have music. I didn't have anything. They didn't even, I mean, the first time I heard about a cell phone, strangely, was on the PCT, the first time I saw a cell phone. And this guy I call Albert in the book, the Eagle Scout dude who helped me lighten my pack, he had this brick of plastic, I kid you not, with these buttons with numbers on the front. And I was like, well, what's that? And he said, this fucking thing, I'm gonna get rid of it. He didn't say fuck because he's a Christian, but he said, I'm gonna get rid of it. And he said, some company is trying to develop this thing. It's called a cell phone. And they found out I was going on this hike, and they asked me to carry it from Mexico to Canada and turn it on every hour or something to see if it would get reception. And I was like, and he goes, and I've been walking for, you know, a month now, never got reception, so I'm not gonna keep carrying it, I'm just gonna leave it in the hiker free box. So somebody has like a cell phone prototype out there, right? So, and I remember us distinctly, and this is why I'm not in product development, saying, that is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. And we were like, who on this green earth would agree to carry a phone around with them all the time? I mean, who would do that? Like, isn't it, I mean, why would you ever want people to always be able to reach you? And we just thought it was absurd. And we were like, that's gonna tank for sure. So this is why I'm a writer instead of, yeah. So yeah.
So we've had Wild, it's been a huge success and #1 best-selling on the New York Times list. Tiny Beautiful Things, also #1 on the Times list. Oprah's, what's Oprah like?
Oh my God, Oprah
Tell me
is
about
fantastic. Oprah,
Tell
I
me
love
everything.
Oprah. So do you want to hear how Oprah, it's a phone story, a cell phone story.
No.
There is a great.
No, were you literally standing there and the phone rang and it was Oprah's people? Or did she ring you direct? Come on, tell me.
Okay. I was in a hotel room in Milwaukee. Wild had been out, you know, a month or so. I was on
And it
my
was
book
doing
tour.
really well anyway,
And
wasn't
Wild at this point had already exceeded any dream I had for myself. It was on the New York Times bestseller list. It was just, and I was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and my cell phone rang, and Milwaukee is just maybe a couple hours away from Chicago. And it was a Chicago number, and I thought it was this sales rep who I was gonna meet later that day, and so I almost let it go to voicemail. And I was like, oh, just answer the phone. I said, hi, this is Cheryl. And the other voice said, hi, this is Oprah. And,
Oh, no, she rang herself.
she rang herself. And I said,
Did you know? Did you know it was the Oprah?
I paused and said, it is, because it was Oprah. You know, I'd be like, it was her voice. It was, and I mean, when Oprah calls you, you know it. And so I was like, oh my God, like, hello, what do you want? And she said, I just finished Wild, oh my God, you know, and then and in her Oprah voice, you know, and we had this long conversation, like 20 minutes, which I kept interrupting her to scream and swear at her and be like, and then she says, after about 20 minutes, she says, so I have an idea, and nobody knew about this yet, just me and her, okay? She says, I have an idea. I would like to restart my book club for Wild. What do you think about that? And I said, well, I think that sounds just fine. And she said, you know, and she was like, she said, I'm on your website right now. My website, which, by the way, I just do myself, you know, and still to this day. And she's like, I see you're going to be in Los Angeles on Saturday, would you like to stay an extra day and come to my house in Santa Barbara? And I was like, okay. And so I find myself, in a limousine on Sunday morning being whisked to Oprah's house. And I spent the day with her. And she's just so lovely. And we just hung out at her place, and which is just a shack, And I mean, and we shot this show. She has a show called Super Soul Sunday, and we had this whole on-camera conversation.
I saw it, yeah.
Kind of like we're doing here tonight, and except we were surrounded by cameras and stuff. And then, oh, you saw the Super Soul Sunday? Yeah.
YouTube.
And Oprah's people did my hair that night. So yeah. So, but it was really fun. And then I just hung out with her and got to know her. And she's the warmest, lovely. I mean, we've stayed in touch. She's so, real. Oprah's exactly like she seems on TV.
Yeah.
I mean, she's.
I don't think she could have be where she is without being the real deal.
Yeah. Well, and that's what was so cool when I talked to her about books and her book club, that she really chooses books that she loves. That and like any list, we're not going to all love the same books that right? Our friends don't always love the books we love. And Oprah just has a lot of friends, so she just chooses them from her heart and shares them with the world. And that ended up being a great thing, for me, a really nice thing.
So, I mean, where do you go from here? So you've been on the New York Times list, we've had the Oprah, Reese Witherspoon is playing you in the film and it's out next year. What next? What are you doing?
I think after all that, the only place you can go is you leave your husband for George Clooney. Right? So my husband's pretty great, So don't tell him that, Somebody's tweeting that as we speak, right? But my husband's not on Twitter, so we're safe. Where we go really is I just write another book.
Yeah, have you got a plan? Do you know what you're going to write next? Or you?
I'm going to just, the thing is the only way to write is to just get back to that place that you originally began, which is just you alone in a room with a lot of anxiety and fear and doubt, but with a vision, And so, I don't know what's going to come next, and I'm just going to write, And the thing is that the other thing is, I doubt that, I doubt that I'll ever write another book that does as well in the marketplace as Wild, An artist has no control over that. And when something like Wild happens, it's just like lightning struck. And, I didn't try to make that happen. What I tried to do is I tried to write the best book I could write, which is what I did with Torch, and what I did with Tiny Beautiful Things, and what I've done with everything I've ever written. And so I'm going to write that next thing, and who knows what the world will think of it. And that's kind of just really not up to me.
I was interviewing Elizabeth Gilbert for Psychology's, this issue actually, and she said exactly the same, Eat, Pray, Love. Hello, it was fantastic, brilliant, but I had to go back. She did Committed, but then she had to go back to her first love, which is writing. She's just got her new novel out now. And it's just about the artist channeling whatever comes and doing what she loves.
Right.
So.
And sometimes other people love it and sometimes other people don't. Yeah. And so you just have to keep the faith with what's true, with the basic, the essential, the element, And so I plan to do that.
Well, whatever you write.
If George gives me time to write.
Really. Whatever you write, I know I'm going to absolutely love it.
So I actually wanted to talk about Dear Sugar and just ask your questions, because that was really what hooked me. And especially you write a lot about relationships. And I know it's been really comforting for me, but you write so honestly about betrayal and infidelity and these things that have just really terrible. And I know a lot, and also you talk about Mr. Sugar, and then you came out as, Cheryl as Dear Sugar. And I wonder how writing honestly helped, or what it did to your relationships, and how did it strengthen them? Did it, you know what I mean? Because it's hard for us for me, I can't just write, and that will change my relationships. But how did that honesty change your relationships?
Right, yeah. So one thing is, Dear Sugar, I was anonymous, meaning that readers didn't know who Sugar was. Can you all still hear me? But I knew who I was. And I also knew that someday my name would be on those columns. So everything I wrote as Sugar, I wrote as Cheryl Strayed. And so, for example, there's a column called A Little Sully in Your Suite, where I write about my husband cheating on me. early in our relationship. And before I wrote about it, I got a question that I knew that the right answer was going to be, to tell the truth about my relationship rather than to just talk about the surface level, the facade. And so I asked my husband, I was like, look, I want to write about this experience we had, and what do you think about that? And he said, do you have to? And I said, well, not if you don't want me to. And he said, actually, do it. And he and I, just really support each other and trust each other. And he knew that I would write. I mean, first of all, he and I, in our relationship, are at a place, like there was nothing that he read that I wrote that was a surprise to him. That we're very intimate with each other. We worked our way all the way through that infidelity and back again. And as I wrote in the column, I'm actually really grateful that happened when it did. I'm great. I mean, this sounds so bizarre, but it's true. I'm grateful that my husband cheated on me early in our relationship so that we could go to that other place of honesty with each other and figure out like what was the problem. And it brought us to a deeper level. And I think anyone who has, I've been with my husband 18 years, and we're very happy and we love each other. And there has also been some difficulty along the way. And that's true in any relationship. And so I wanted to sort of share the truth of that. I always think it'd be so interesting. I don't know if you guys do this here, but in the United States, sometimes there will be like a 50th wedding anniversary party. And they write it up like in the paper. It'll be like so-and-so and so-and-so, they're celebrating 50 years, and their marriage is, they had 4 kids, and they, lived in 3 cities, and they were, and it says all this stuff. What I think would always be so interesting if we had a real one. She was fucking her boss for 3 years, but then they figured it out, and, that we really see actually what happened, and how do you make a 50-year marriage work? And it's not all, roses and rainbows, right? And so I wanted as Dear Sugar to tell that story. And so what it's done, I mean, it hasn't done anything to my marriage, because like I said, this was not new information to my husband, the stuff I wrote. It was just a piece of us that I decided to share. Now, one thing about my writing is I'm really, people say, oh, you're so honest and open. That's true, and it's also true that I don't write everything. There are whole huge swaths of my life about which you know nothing. And I think that people forget that because there are huge swaths of my life about which you know a lot. And so, I'm very conscious and careful. My siblings, they come up in Wild. One of the questions I always get is about my siblings. And there are lots of stories about my siblings that I didn't tell because I wanted to protect their privacy. I didn't want to hurt their feelings or in any way invade their lives, But so I'm always making that judgment as a writer. And I do think, on the other hand, like I mentioned, that my brother read Wild, and those of you who've read the book know that he's in some of the book's most difficult scenes. And my brother has had a hard life, and he didn't even graduate from high school. He's not like a bookish intellectual person, but he read Wild and he understood it on every in the most sophisticated way. And he and I had the most profound conversation that we've had with each other in our lives because of Wild, and because I wrote honestly about what I felt about him and what happened. And he said, I can't believe it, that stuff you wrote, Cheryl. He said, I buried so much of that, and it just all came. It was incredibly healing for him to read the book and for us to talk. I think I think most of us are so afraid of speaking the truth because we think it will hurt people or it will cause conflict. And I'm here to tell you that actually, the opposite has happened in my life. So many things are healed, and when you bring light in, so many things are actually made better. It's not as scary as you would think.
I have a daughter who lost her mum at 11.
Uh-huh.
And she was doing sort of stuff that you were doing in your 20s when she was 15. And she struggled with life a lot. If there was any advice I could give her, what would it be? Because she's still struggling at 30.
She's 30. She's 30, did you say?
30 odd now. She's got 2 children.
Uh-huh. You know, it's so hard. It's so hard for me to just encapsulate, you know, one piece of advice. One of the things that I think has been really helpful to me in my own life, frankly, is books. You know, my recommendation, you know, how can you help her, is find books that have been enlightening to you and give them to her. Well, then buy all of my books. You know, really honestly, Tiny Beautiful Things is full of advice. The book is advice, and it's advice of the Spirit, and it has to do with, I mean, the only way that your daughter will change her life is by changing her life. You know, you cannot change it for her. And I know how hard that is, because I have loved people before who haven't changed in the ways that I hope they will. And you just can't. You have to do it yourself. And pretty much every sugar column says that in different ways. And so I do think that it could be useful to her. And also just love her. You know, love her through it. And, you know, share with her your honest opinions in ways that maybe, there's this thing I write about in Tiny Beautiful Things, these teenage girls I worked with. And for me, it was a really interesting mind shift. We treated these girls with what I call unconditional positive regard, which is different than saying everything they do is okay. You know, so if one of the girls I was working with was, you know, sleeping with a 30-year-old guy, which, you know, many of them were, they're like 14, I would say, you're doing the wrong thing. You know, I would share my honest opinion, but from a place that's not judgmental, but rather holding them in unconditional positive regard. And I think that that is the best thing that we can do for the people we love who are clearly harming themselves. Good luck. I'm sorry it's hard. And you should really read my books. I'm teasing. Or at least buy them. You don't have to read them.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hello.
Hello.
Where?
I'm over here.
Oh, there we go.
You've sort of come to my question. You've mentioned the word honesty so many times tonight, living honestly and writing honestly. But for me, the word that really is dominant, particularly in Tiny Beautiful Things, is compassion. And I've heard you use the word super love. I read it in an article somewhere. And I would just love to hear you speak a little bit about compassion or super love, or how you come from that place in all the advice that you've given.
Yeah, that word super love. Somebody asked me, I think I must have said it in response to a question. It was, you know, somebody said, what's the best advice you've ever gotten, and from whom, and what's the worst advice? And the worst advice my mother's mother, my grandmother, gave me. And when I was 14, she said, I'm going to give you one piece of advice. Never, when you get married, never in all of your life get fully naked in front of your husband. Okay, that was bad advice, don't you think? Really bad advice. My poor grandfather. But anyway, but my mother, I remember in the early 70s, I was born in 1968, so I was pretty young, and I remember seeing a photograph, and I think it's a famous photograph, and if anyone knows what it is, please tell me, because I've looked for this photograph because I remember it so vividly. But I want to find it again. I don't know who took it. But it's a picture of, there were American, on some college campus, American protesters. They were protesting the Vietnam War. And there was this image of these like National Guard guys holding these guns. And this young woman had gone up to the gun and put a flower in the barrel of the gun. Have you seen that picture? And I was a little, you know, just maybe 4 or 5, and I said to my mom, I asked her to explain this photo to me. What's happening here? And she said that she explained to me that you know, that these people were in disagreement about something. They were on other sides of an issue. And I said, well, why did the woman put the flower in the gun? And she said, because she's trying to zap him back. She's trying to zap him with super love. And she said that's always the best, you know, way to approach somebody who who doesn't like you or who disagrees with you. Just zap them back with super love so that it creates an opening between you. And I think that was really good advice. And I think it has to do with compassion. That word calm, it's like to be with in passion. And I think that most of us are really deeply compassionate from the beginning. And anyone who's had a child, unless your child is a sociopath, for which I apologize, but children have that kind of, they identify with everything. They feel the joy of the world and the pain of the world. And the coolest thing for me as a mom is to try to explain hate to my kids. Like when I've had to explain homophobia or explain the Holocaust or explain, and my kids are just like, they don't understand, they do not understand it. And it's because it doesn't make sense to them. And it only makes sense to us because we've sort of been worn down, right, by a lack of compassion. And so I think that having compassion is, reigniting and remembering that place where we didn't understand why you would harm anyone, And this isn't to say my kids don't beat the hell out of each other. I mean, but so I'm not saying that they're these idealized creatures, but I think that there is that kind of innocent place that we can kind of relate to each other with a sense of understanding and kindness. So that's I would think, the highest value thing I hold in value the most is that kindness.
You mentioned about the hike was like creating your own rite of passage, and you said that our cultures have kind of missed that. Any ideas how we can credibly get that back, particularly as mothers, because you talk so touchingly about your mum?
Yeah, I actually think it's really, I think we need to bring it back. We need to bring it back somehow. And I think it has to do with being connected to nature because, the cultures who still do rites of passage or the cultures who used to do rites of passage, they're almost always cultures who lived in a more tribal way and therefore a way that is more connected to the land and the earth and nature and all that stuff. And, you see this, the young, and often it is, like the young boy has to go off for 3 days or, and fast and meditate and, or kill an elephant or whatever the hell, And I think that obviously we can't all do that in our urban lives and such. But to do something for our children that allows them to do all the things like I talked about that I had to, I made decisions and I suffered the consequences of them if they were the wrong decision, or I benefited and I got the triumph if they were the right. I did it myself. It has to do with resilience, solitude, working for what you get. And also I think that the essentials. One of the things on the PCT is that my main concerns were not emotional. They were, how do I get water? What am I going to have for dinner? How do I get over this mountain safely? It was actually survival, which really can't be replicated, I think, in our regular lives for most of us. And so, I've really thought about this for my own kids. Like, what am I? So my solution, I'm going to just go drive them out and just say, happy trails, kids. See you in a month. But, we'll see. But no, something like that we've got to do. And I don't know what the answer is. But I do think that we can do it. I think that that would be a really helpful thing to a lot of our kids to force them to be resilient. Yeah. Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you.